Stella Garber is Trello's head of marketing and has been with the team for almost 5 years. She works remotely from Chicago, where she lives with her husband and 2-year-old son. A fun fact about Stella is that she speaks 3 languages fluently, but will only be presenting in English today. Oh. Maybe at Bash she'll do one in a different language. As you can tell, she's a Jane of all trades and an expert on productivity and remote work. So you're in good hands. Please welcome Stella to the stage.
Thanks so much. Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Bridget, for the warm welcome. Like Bridget mentioned, my name is Stella, and I run marketing for Trello. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the strategies and tips and things we do at Trello, and myself personally as a remote worker and running a remote team. So let's start with some fun stats about remote work. So according to a study by Sure Payroll, 77% of people reported greater productivity when they were working remotely than in an office, and 86% of people responded that they needed to work alone to hit their maximum productivity. What's more, 2/3 of managers say employees who work remotely increase their overall productivity. So this might go against what maybe some of the, that there are common misconceptions about remote work and that people are watching Netflix at home and doing their laundry, when really that's actually not the case. And there's a lot of other benefits, like lower stress levels. In a separate survey, employees who worked remotely reported 82% lower stress. There have been studies that show that remote work is good for marriage as well. People have happier marriages and overall productivity. But it's not all sunshine and yoga pants with remote work. There are a lot of challenges. You can feel isolated. You can feel disconnected from your team. You can feel pretty lonely if it's just you working from home every day. There's a quote from Anna, who works at Trello, about some of the challenges with remote work. So today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we combat all of these things. And the good news is that you can combat it really easily, because being strategic about remote work will help you be successful. It's an interesting thing. A lot of times people will ask questions about remote work, and I'll sort of push back and say, well, what would you do if you were in a regular office? You wouldn't just show up to a regular office that had no desks or lighting or any sort of meeting room structure. So I'd encourage people who are working remotely to really be strategic and think about their own setup. Another way to think about it is, if you're like me, you can't just show up at the gym and expect to have a great workout. You need to go in with a plan, otherwise you're going to be watching reality TV most of the time on the elliptical. So let me tell you a little bit about myself and why I think you should listen to me. As Bridget mentioned, I've been with Trello for just about 5 years, and all of that time I've scaled a remotely distributed team in addition to working remotely myself. But I've actually worked remotely almost my whole career at different startups where it just didn't really matter and make a ton of sense for people to be co-located in an office. So Trello, actually, even before I throw this stat at you, how many folks here use Trello or have used Trello? Awesome, very cool. For those who haven't, Trello is a visual collaboration tool you can use to manage projects at work. You can use it to manage projects at home. It's awesome. It's free. Definitely check it out. I think a big reason why so much of Trello, over 70% of the folks who work at Trello are remotely distributed, because we are working and helping other teams be productive in project management. So, but how did this get started? We had an office in New York City in the super early days of Trello, and one of our star engineers, Brett, had the opportunity to move to Hawaii with his wife. And of course, I'm not sure if this is a saying, but I feel like it should be a saying: if one has the opportunity to move to Hawaii, one should move to Hawaii. And we thought, instead of losing Brett, we should give this remote work thing a chance Does it really matter where he's writing code, especially if he's working sort of the same New York office hours? And that's what happened. Brett was the first, but then there were many, many to come. You can see the little dot in the middle of the country of Chicago, which is where I'm from. So why remote for Trello, and why did it work? Well, the first is that hiring became a lot easier. When you're not competing against the highest competitive market, San Francisco, New York, which is where Trello's headquarters were, you're removing these geographic limitations, and all of a sudden you get all of this great diversity. You get geographic diversity, you get age diversity, skill diversity. We had a few Google developer experts who joined Trello because they had few opportunities living in Minneapolis to work at a top tech company. And hopefully, I think that's changing a little bit now, but it's definitely something to consider. The second thing is that we wanted to have a results-oriented culture. And being remote really lends itself to that, because you don't have sort of those given, hey, let's call an all-hands meeting in an office where everybody's there. You have to be much more strategic about communication, and not even about communication, but how people are going to be successful. What are the ways that we measure success? It's not who's burning the midnight oil and working the longest, latest hours. It's more about who's driving business results, and we can measure that, and it doesn't super matter where they're located. And the last thing is that at startups, which is what Trello was before Atlassian acquired us a couple of years ago, things are constantly breaking as you grow. And with remote work and having a digital tool set, it was a lot, I would say, easier than having to deal with sort of the physical limitations of running out of office space. So remote work lended itself really well to Trello's team and how we were growing. So you're probably sitting there wondering, okay, cool, it worked for Trello, but what did they do? What does that actually mean, and how can I apply that in my life or in my company? But before we do that, we need to take a step back and define remote work, because a lot of the misconceptions about remote work come from sort of a lack of a shared definition. So working from home is not remote work. And what I mean by that is that sometimes people have like a Fridays working from home, the rest of the days in the office, or sort of like a flex time schedule, and then they'll say that they tried remote work and it didn't work. And this distinction is really important, because if you're only working from home once a week, or whenever your kid has a soccer game or something like that, you are not going to set yourself up for long-term success and invest in the type of environment for productivity, because it's not a permanent thing. Your team is not going to have sort of the processes and tools set up, because you still default to this idea that people are going to come back to an office, and that office is the shared context. So I think this one is really important definitionally. The next one is there's this awesome trend happening right now with these digital nomads, which are people who just take their laptop and they're working from the beach, and they're going to Bali, and they're going to Helsinki one week, and I think that's awesome, and oh my God, do I wish I could do that, maybe 10 years ago. But that's also not how we're going to define remote work today, for a lot of reasons. The first is that you need to have a defined set of hours, a defined environment to be successful in remote work. The second is that when you do something like this, in my opinion, you're sort of not maximizing your productivity at work, and you're not really maximizing your fun vacation time, because you are trying to juggle both things. When you're working in a team, this sort of digital nomad thing creates this sort of inequity where people feel like maybe one person is too busy surfing instead of working on a project, and that's not sustainable. And so what is remote work? Remote work is working from home as a discipline. So what does that mean? The most important factor for remote work success in a team is a shared context. That means a shared set of rules. Think about when you're in an office. People are sort of looking around and seeing, what time are people coming in? What's an appropriate amount of lunch to take? What's people have all of these digital clues, and you can sort of start to feel the inequities creep in when someone is taking more vacation than someone else. And so this is another example of like where I think that it's important to have those shared contexts in a physical office as well as the remote environment, but in the remote environment, it's so much more important. So here are Trello's rules for remote work that we tell everybody on our team. The first is that you should always assume remote. We have folks working in, I think, just about every Atlassian office, but we also have folks who are working from home, most of them. And we tell people that you need to assume that people are not going to be in conference rooms. So what does that mean? That means this is a very typical Trello meeting where even people who are in an office, like you can't tell this, but Jessica Lynn here and Brendan Campbell, who you can meet at our booth, who's a PM for Trello, they're in an office, but you wouldn't be able to tell. Everybody's on the same footing because we're all taking calls from our desks. And I can tell you, it is an extremely weird experience when you are the only remote person whose face is on a wall in a conference room. It creates this really weird dynamic. There's also, people don't feel like they can speak up as much because someone is sort of whispering to the other person in the room and you can't hear. So having that shared sort of context of assuming remote is really, really important. Another rule is that you have a dedicated office space with which is a room with a door that closes. And this can be challenging in areas like New York or San Francisco where real estate is really expensive. But I think it's very, very important to create the separation between your work and your sort of personal life. It's also pretty unprofessional if you're having a video call with somebody and your unmade bed is in the background. So this can be really anything. I have a friend who works at Salesforce and he works remotely. He has a little closet that he converted into a standing desk, and he keeps his laptop there, and he takes most of his working days from there, and when he's done, he closes it, and that's sort of it for him. That's one extreme. But it is very important to have that dedicated space for remote work. And I think there's also sort of this misconception that remote workers are working from a coffee shop or a co-working space, and you'll find that this is a super informal survey I took at Trello with just 10 folks, but it sort of confirmed what I was thinking, which is that most of the time you're going to be working from home, because when you have that dedicated environment that you've set up that has the great internet and has all of the things you need to be productive, you're going to default to working from there instead of introducing some of the variables, like a coffee shop where they're playing terrible music that you hate, the internet's not working, and you're hearing all about someone's date from last weekend. That is not setting yourself up for productivity. Now, I definitely encourage folks to work from coffee shops. There's a lot of research that shows that a lot of creativity or focus work comes from those spaces, but I think that the difference here is that that becomes a thing that you do that is sort of irregular or special, and that's not sort of your everyday bread and butter office environment. Oh, and I should say that some people choose to work from a co-working space, which is totally fine. That's still that same idea where it's a dedicated space where you're going, and some people have that need to be more social and they're better around other people, and that's totally fine too. That's something that we support. I think the thing though is that they're going there every day, and that's sort of their regular day. Another rule is that you have the tools to do your job. So that means having a great remote work setup. That means using a lot of great digital tools with your team that make sure that communication is happening across the team, the project, the company. So shouldn't be surprised to see Trello and Confluence on there. Slack is something that we use for day-to-day communication, which I'll talk a little bit about more later. And one thing that's surprising is that email actually is something that we don't use a ton of within the team. We actually only really use email for outbound communication. So I think it's kind of a fun thing that we don't deal with the email overload that a lot of, that's more common elsewhere. And then Zoom I'll talk about too. Video is super, super, super important. Remote work doesn't mean that you're not talking to people and that you're not talking to people face to face. It just means that you may not be in the same room when you're talking to them. I think also that tools in the last 5 years that I've been at Trello, tools have gotten so much better. I remember when I started my career and there was no Slack and we were all sort of chatting in Campfire, which was like this Basecamp product that they shut down a long time ago. And you'd get into that, you know, sort of video call and it would be like, and you can't really work like that. So that's why it's really important to use these tools, but also having the really great internet is really important, not surprisingly. Over-communication is really, really important. So I say over-communicate because it should feel like you're over-communicating. And if it feels that way, that means you're probably communicating the right amount. I read a stat that says for someone to internalize a piece of new information, they have to hear it 7 times. So I try to tell my team at least 3 times if there's some important thing, say it in a meeting, put it on a Confluence page, put it on a Trello board. You may feel like you're repeating yourself, but people are coming from all different contexts. They're getting information. Information management is a hot topic. There's so much going on. So being able to share that information in lots of different ways becomes even more important in a remote team. It also creates an opportunity for documentation and creating artifacts around a project. And as a manager, that's really awesome because all of a sudden, instead of coming and tapping someone on the shoulder, which obviously I can't do with a distributed team, I can go to their Confluence pages and I can go to the Trello board and I can see exactly what I need to see without bugging them, which is great. An important thing to remember too is that communication tools, you may think that chat is just chat and you don't really need to talk about chat with your team because it's chat and it's obvious, but when you're working remotely, the way people use tools is very different, and it can be really different depending on your job function, and it can be really different depending on what team you're on. So one thing that we do on my team is that we have a document where we have written down how we're using every tool. So when is it appropriate to send a Slack message, and when is it more appropriate to document something in Trello or Confluence? Because if you're constantly pinging people in Slack, that means they're probably not getting their work done. And if it's something that's about a project where other people are involved, then having a DM in Slack means that you're not giving other people who are involved the opportunity, the transparency to see the conversation that's happening. So really having a conversation with the team or setting some rules around how each tool is used. We also have a very strong preference towards video chat because in written communication, there's so much nuance with human behavior and tone and body language that gets lost. So we try to really encourage folks to jump into a Zoom call whenever possible. Having regular check-ins as things are constantly changing, right? My favorite expression is that the only constant in life is change, and being open to that change and having sort of check-in points for your team to check in on the health and check in on the processes. Do we need to have more social stuff going on? Do we need to introduce a different tool? Do we need to cut down our tool set? Should we be using Google Docs for this thing and Confluence for this thing? Having these sorts of conversations with the team is really important around the communication tools. And it might feel like this is overkill, but it's really, really not, because when you're remote work full-time, this is the kind of stuff that helps you battle that disconnectedness, that isolation, feeling connected with your team and knowing what's going on. These are having the good practices with communication tools really solidifies that. The other thing to keep in mind is with all this change going on, you have to be very flexible. People are going to have a lot of feelings and a lot of opinions, and you have to be open to the fact that that things are going to be breaking and that you can change them. Now, we love Trello, obviously. No surprise there. But one of the things that Trello as a product encourages is sort of this flexibility where you can where you can have the ability to change workflows and structures on a board. And so we as a team take advantage of that. For example, we have a Trello board that we use just for running our biweekly meetings. And so some changes that we've made, first of all, are that we, as our team grew, we decided that we didn't need to have a weekly check-in and biweekly was good enough. And that during the 2 weeks, people could add cards to our meeting board and create an agenda where we could sort of present to each other and share information. And we also have a designated meeting lead that leads our biweekly meeting, and it's all sort of done through the Trello board. The other thing to remember is that if you're not having fun at work, what's the point? People, in order to get the most productivity and engagement, people have to be having fun. And so in an office, this can happen more, it's not maybe as structured, that there's those water cooler moments, but maybe there is, depending on the size of your company, there's a workplace experience team and they're planning stuff that's going on or whatever it is. But the remote working experience needs to have the structure in there for fun. So for example, one of my favorite Slack channels at Atlassian is our celebrity gossip channel. I'm definitely checking in there to make sure I'm caught up on all the celeb gossip. But also we were talking about our weekends and sharing photos about vacations. We have, every couple of weeks we have sort of like a happy hour, we call them jam sessions, where the team gets together and we play games together, or we'll have a beer or play some sort of game. And it's just really important to have that feeling of getting to know each other as humans and have fun. So as I think I mentioned this before, but remote work doesn't mean that you actually aren't seeing people in person and seeing their faces. We make a lot of time for FaceTime. So we have these regular bonding time things. Like I mentioned, we have this bi-weekly jam session on our team. We also have special guests who come in, Trello users who come in via video and talk to us. We also send each other sort of birthday gifts on our team. This is a weird thing that it's not that weird, but it's really cool. We send each other personalized birthday gifts with every birthday. And we also have offsites. So we have opportunities to do things like planning or getting together in person every once in a while. And one thing I remember, soon after Trello was acquired, I was chatting with Robert, who's the CMO at Atlassian, and he was like, wow, you know, for a remotely distributed team, I'm just shocked at how close you guys are and how well you jive. And I'm like, yeah, over the years, we have gotten together, we are part of each other's lives, we know each other's families, and just because we're not there every single day doesn't mean that we can't have those bonds that really make a team function better together. And then we also have this sort of rule around Zoom. I mentioned about the humanity of seeing someone face to face. One of our communication tool rules, that's a weird thing to say out loud, communication tool rules, is that if a conversation is taking longer than a minute or two, just jump into a Zoom. There's a great Slack tip that if you just do /Zoom into Slack, a Zoom link will pop up and you can be in Zoom in like a second. And we use that all the time. It just makes things much easier. Having team overlap is really important so that you know that people are around when there need to be meetings or when there need to be conversations happening. So our rule at Trello is that there's this 12 to 4 p.m. Eastern overlap that everybody has to be available for meetings. It makes it challenging, I think, with hiring. I think a lot of the remote work misconceptions also come from people working regular hours in lots of different markets, and that becomes a very, very difficult thing to scale. But having that chunk of time when you know people are around and available and scheduling meetings around that has been a great thing for us. Having shared calendars where instead of going back and forth 5 minutes about when to have a meeting, you can just pop into Google Calendar and schedule a meeting is great. Also, like if someone's not around and I don't see in their Slack status, I can just pop into their calendar and say, oh yeah, they're on vacation today, or oh yeah, they're at a client visit or something like that. That makes it so much easier. Chat status is also really great. Writing in when you're on vacation, writing in when you're out for lunch, when you're at yoga, whatever it is, so that if someone's not getting a response, they understand why, and there's that set of the shared context or expectations for when you'll be back. And it's important to have maker days, which are times when, if you're someone who needs a lot of working time to get things done, as a team, you can designate days just for that. On my team, we have Tuesdays and Thursdays are maker days, so we try not to have meetings around those days. So to recap, assume remote. Even if you have just one person who's working remotely, if everybody can have the shared context, it makes the whole experience better. And especially when it's you who's that remote work person, you're going to appreciate it. Having a dedicated space, the office with the door that closes, is really important. You also need to have dedicated childcare. Another misconception is that, oh, when you work from home, you can watch your kids. Wrong. I am a mom. I know that. I can say that very comfortably. You cannot work from home and have dedicated childcare. You need dedicated childcare. End of sentence. You need the proper tools to get your job done. You need high-speed internet, full stop there too. If you're over-communicating, you're probably communicating just the right amount of information. Having the annual team offsites is a great way. It doesn't necessarily need to be annual. I should maybe say regular there. And how are you going to afford that? Well, guess what? You're not paying for office space or any of the other expensive crap that happens in an office. So you should definitely have plenty of budget there. And then that team overlap is really great for just knowing when people can be around without having to feel like, oh, I don't want to make them work late, but this is the only time that works for a meeting. Having that set time when you know people should be available creates the feeling of equity. So when it comes right down to it, remote work, is about hiring smart people to get shit done and doing that over and over again, just like in a regular physical office. So let's talk about personal productivity, because today is about being a happy, healthy, and productive remote worker. So one of the most important things about personal productivity, not surprisingly, is time management. And when you think about time management, a very important distinction to make is, are you a manager like me, or are you a maker? Because your schedule is going to look extremely different depending on what your role is, and it should. A manager spends the majority of their time in meetings, coordinating things, managing things, etc. That's the nature of the job. If you're a maker, you need large swaths of focus time without distractions, full stop. If a manager has a maker's schedule, they're just sitting, twiddling their thumbs, they don't know what to do with themselves. If a maker has a manager's schedule, they go crazy because they don't have time to do any of their work, whether it's writing or designing or coding. Knowing which of those things you are can help you structure your schedule. So now that you've made that distinction, it's important to set clear boundaries in your life, in your work life. So this is where having that office with the door that closes, I think, is really important, because at the end of the day, you should be able to, when your work is done, close your laptop, close your door, and have the separation. The commute, as bad as it is, it creates a transitional period where you're not at work and you can get in the mental state to be at home. So one of the best things about working remotely is that you don't have a commute, but you do want to be able to have that separation. And some ways to do that are around configuring your notifications. Slack has an awesome do not disturb mode. So make sure that you're setting that in times where you don't want to be bugged. And a lot of times it's come up on the team where people feel where people are like, oh, I'm getting pinged in the evening, or this person's in this time zone and they're pinging me. And our sort of advice or best practice is that you should be controlling your own sort of environment. And if that means setting Slack to do not disturb when you don't want to be pinged, that's exactly what you should be doing. Being remote means you get to control your schedule. So put it in your calendar. If you're sharing your calendar across the team, block out time. Don't feel bad. putting a 2-hour chunk of time in and that says, writing or coding or deep work or whatever it is, because otherwise people will schedule over that time and you won't be able to be productive. And then you want to be able to optimize your environment. So I think, yes, so people have different things that they do in their office to be more productive. Light has come up a lot. When I asked other Trello folks how they structure their environments, natural light is really important. This is a coworker of mine, Alexia, who lives in Rio, and this was her view for a long time. A lot of folks have standing desks. I have a treadmill desk. I'm obsessed with it. I'm happy to talk with you offline about it. Also, having a fun background is great. Just creating that environment that inspires creativity or tranquility, whatever you need to do. This last example is someone who has set up a mic and like light for good calls because their office is in kind of a gloomy place. So you get to control your environment, and I think that's I think a big reason why remote workers can be more productive, because you get to optimize for yourself. And it was Shakespeare in Hamlet that said, "To thine own self be true," and remote work helps you do that. You get, if you know yourself, if you have a sense of self-awareness about what you need to be productive, you can set yourself up that way. So let me give you an example. I have a coworker who is very social. She loves hanging out with people in the office, and all her friends were office people. And when she went remote, after working in an office, she knew that she needed to create that same social environment, but outside of her home office. Or if you're like me, my problem is I have a hard time shutting off my brain. So if I didn't have a stop, I would be probably working all the time. And so what I do is I schedule some sort of a workout or a lunch meeting or something where I have to put my computer away and shut my brain off. So, and that's the thing, if you know yourself, if you have check-in points throughout the day, this is an example where you can say, am I being productive? Am I staying hydrated? Do I need to employ some sort of productivity technique like the Pomodoro method, which you can read all about on Trello's blog, hint, hint, nudge, nudge. We have lots of different productivity techniques you can look at to help you manage your time. And really make sure that you're happy, because if you're not happy, you can self-correct. So let's recap. So, why did Trello do remote work, and really what are some advantages of remote work? Hiring, breaking down geographic barriers makes hiring a lot easier. Having a results-oriented culture is easier to do when you don't take things for granted being in a physical office space. And scaling processes is easier when you're relying on digital tools versus like a physical environment. Trello's remote working rules, which I hope you will be able to recite as you leave this room, but assume remote, have a dedicated space, an office with a door that closes, make sure that you have the proper tools to get your job done, over-communicate to make sure you're communicating the right amount, make time for FaceTime with offsites, and make sure to have team overlap where everybody is around for collaboration. And so some questions to ask yourself as you're thinking about remote work and walking out of this room. Am I a maker or a manager? And does my calendar reflect that? Is that hindering my productivity? And this is another one where I don't think this is a remote work thing. I think this is a general human working environment thing. Is my workspace optimized? Do I have the right amount of light? Do I have the right amount of space? Do I have a separate space? It's not the kitchen, it's not the living room. And if not, then change it. Do I have the right structure to promote happiness and productivity? Do I need to schedule a lunchtime workout a couple times a week to get myself out of the house? Do I need to schedule lunch with a friend a couple times a week to make sure that I'm getting my social fill, I guess? And the best thing about remote work is that if you answer anything that's like, no, I'm not sure, you get to take control and you get to set yourself up for success if you know yourself. So taking the time to really understand your own productivity and then setting yourself up, being strategic about your working environment will help you be happy, healthy, and productive. So I think that's it. I think we have some time for questions.